animals. So if they...
That's totally fine. Hello, everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics. For 5 minutes of your time and get you to the divine. I have the pleasure of having Amber Rose, the religious hippie, on with me today. How are you doing, Amber?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Gregory. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. We're going to get right to it. So I know a little about your background, but I like to interview people like pretending I know nothing about your background, and maybe my subscribers or future subscribers know nothing about you. So how old are you? If that's not too gauche to ask a woman how old she is, how old are you? Where do you live? And just basic background stuff.
Yeah, so I'm 23 years old. I'm in the Chicagoland area. I was a cradle Catholic who fell away for 8 years, and then I came back to the faith in 2018 or 19. Still kind of wonky on that. And I live at home with my parents still. I go to Liberty University Online, which is a Protestant college, but I started going before I came back into my faith, and I really like how they structure everything. So I've just stuck with it. It's my own little cross to carry sometimes. And then I'm a junior and I'm studying graphic design. And besides that, I run my own business, which is The Religious Hippie. And you can find me at thereligioushippie.com or on social media sites. And yeah, anything I miss?
We'll get to some of this, like with the whole genesis of the religious hippie. So how would you describe your Catholic upbringing? Like, are your parents still married? I'm assuming they are because you live with them, but give us the background. How many siblings do you have? What kind of masses did they go to growing up?
Yeah, so I was, again, cradle Catholic. I have one sister who's awesome. She moved out a while ago, but she is a chemical engineer. And so we're really close. My parents are both Catholic in the sense of they were both raised in the traditional Latin Mass, my dad especially. And so we've just kind of stuck with that. And that was what my upbringing was like. We were raised in the traditional Latin Mass, and it was really fun. I was catechized, and we would constantly be involved with the church too. My mom would teach religious ed when I was younger, and I would help her out with that. I was also in some religious ed classes. But yeah, it was a really solid Catholic upbringing.
I think you're one of the few people I've ever met that actually were raised in the TLM milieu, because I think the large majority of people get there later in their life.
Yeah, it's interesting because the next generation that's coming, like the babies that are babies now, so many of them are being raised in the traditional Latin Mass now. And I'm like, we're going to have so many trad babies. It's going to be great.
If the parish isn't crying, it's dying. So I think
exactly.
That's great. Did you ever, when you were in high school, let's say, or middle school, go to Novus Ordo parishes and you saw what I like to call the liturgical abuses? I mean, did you see the bad music or the resurrected Jesus or even liturgical dances? Did you see any of those?
I think I was pretty sheltered in the sense of the Novus Ordo churches we did attend when we couldn't make it to TLM, because our TLM parish is about an hour away. They weren't really that bad yet. Nowadays, I'm like, whoa, even the Novus Ordo parishes I went to as a kid have now gone almost so modernist that you wouldn't even recognize it as a Catholic Mass. But back when I was a kid, I definitely remember when people started receiving more on the hand in our diocese. And I remember asking Mom, like, oh, I was like probably like 6 or 7. And I was maybe, I don't know. Yeah. After my first communion. And I remember asking, like, oh, can I receive in the hand? Like, that looks so cool. Like, it's new and it's different. And like, whoa. And my mom was like, no, we don't do that. That is like a liturgical abuse. Like, we don't. And she had to explain it to me. And I was like, then why are people doing it? I'm like, this is dumb. Why? And the whole reason is because a lot of people don't believe in the true presence anymore. Now it's like, it used to be only 70-ish percent, 73%. Now it's in the 80s. Which is ridiculous.
And these are weekly attending self-identifying Catholics, which makes it even more frightening.
It is. And not to mention that I have been ridiculed more times for receiving on the tongue while kneeling than some people who are openly pro-choice Catholics have when they go up and receive communion. And I'm just like, okay, well, A, that's sacrilege. But also B, I can't kneel and receive on the tongue, but you can openly support abortion. And the priest is like, yeah, here you go. Like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, there's just massive double standards. So, like, I had a different upbringing because I didn't go TLM. I go to the Ordinariate of the Church of St. Peter. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a national diocese. It's It's Anglican, former Anglican congregations that came back to Holy Mother Church.
Okay.
So their liturgy is the trappings of the TLM, but it's in English. So it's ad orientem, you have to receive on the tongue, altar rails. It's a Latin mass, but in English. It's a weird hybrid. But
Interesting. Okay.
growing up, I am 48, so I grew up like in the peak of the abuses of the mass, and I mean, just decades of just having the bad 1972 music. I went to
on Eagle's Wings playing in the background.
oh god, and I went to a Catholic university that literally had, and this is early 90s, the pantomime during the Our Father. So they had these people dressed up like pantomimes, and they would come out and do a liturgical pantomime dance during the Our Father.
Oh no!
And then I've had the liturgical dance ones where people came out and did the dance, but more often than not, it's just the typical. Let's put the tabernacle in a closet. Let's bring in resurrected Jesus. Let's get rid of all the statue. The typical stuff that we see in the Novus Ordo Mass, and have like 25 extraordinary ministers of communion. But that was normal to me.
Right.
But my father, my family's from Mexico, so my father kind of raised me in the Freemasons infiltrated the church kind of mindset. And I don't know, you maybe you can address
like the Dr. Taylor Marshall mindset. Yeah,
well,
I'm very familiar with it.
Oh well, so I was going to ask you, because it's your family grew up in TLM. There's a strong strand of, I'm not going to say like vehement sedevacanist, the church is in full apostasy thread, but there's going to be reasons why people are in TLM and not in Novus Ordo. Some of it's just we like the liturgy more, but some of they're going to be like, there's infiltration, there's all this stuff like that. So my father kind of raised me in that, and I always liked the old churches, like the ones in downtown Chicago, that are traditional looking, even though they had the kooky masses. But I didn't actually go to a TLM until I was probably 40, 41, 42. So it's very different than your upbringing. But how would you describe, like if you asked your mom, dad, why do we go to a Latin mass when 95% or more parishes in the United States are in English? What would she say?
I think it's mainly because it was the mass that the saints were raised in. It was the mass that carried on through thousands of years, that people have tried to destroy for thousands of years, and yet still persists because God wants it to. It's the mass that has incense. It's the mass that shows real reverence, and it really pushes the importance of who we are in front of. We're in front of the King of the universe, like the God who created you and I. And the TLM really pushes that a lot more than the Novus Ordo did. And I know for a fact that like they wanted us to be raised to understand that. Like this isn't just we're just raising you in this because, this is what we were raised with. There's actual reasons behind it. And being able to, I still hated going to mass because I was like, a kid, and I was like, I just want to hang out with my friends and, and stuff. But when I got older, I really had an appreciation for the reverence that I was, brought up in, because I look at a lot of modern churches now and the lack of reverence, and I'm like, Jesus doesn't deserve this,
For sure, the way people dress, people chewing gum in the pews, and
I saw one kid who had goldfish crackers and Mountain Dew, and he was eating them like right before communion, which is technically a sin because you're not supposed to eat anything an hour before communion. And his parents were just like, come on, like, let's go. And he was just holding his little crackers in the line for communion. And I was like, and he wasn't like a kid. He was like 12.
Oh, well, that's even more egregious.
But it's like a kid to me because I'm 23, so.
If you were to ask your mom, and I know you can't speak for your mom, but like if you ask them, like, what is your take on Vatican Council II? What would they say?
I think it would depend.
I'll ask you what your take on Vatican Council II if you want to answer that.
Yeah, my take is that it is valid. It is valid. There are a lot of problems that I think people just kind of ran with it. Like instead of local parish priests having to go to their bishops every time they want to do something or change something in their church, they now just have the freedom to take out altar rails or to take out, statues and to whitewash. So there were, I don't think it was made with all ill intent. I do believe that it modernized the Mass quite a bit, but there's nothing in the Vatican II documents about taking away incense or taking away, altar rails or anything like that. But if you give people an inch, they run with a mile. And so they kind of took that as oh, well, I can do whatever I want now. And so they started changing the Mass and they started making it irreverent and things. I have seen the Novus Ordo Mass performed very traditionally at Orientem. The consecration is in Latin, but the rest of it's in English. I've seen some beautiful like Novus Ordo parishes and masses who have altar rails, and it looks like a TLM parish, but it's the way that the Novus Ordo was meant to be celebrated. However, it has been, what's the right term? I guess, I don't know if infiltrate is the right term, but there are a lot of people who want to destroy traditionalism. And my generation is really into traditionalism. If you haven't noticed, the TLM by me is booming, and the Novus Ordos by me are hardly attended by people my age.
For sure.
Unless it's like the traditional one.
The teen mass didn't appeal to you. It's shocking. I remember, like, normally it's the Sunday evening mass where they get the more poppy Protestant music. I remember they would have the kids come up and surround the altar for the consecration. They probably still do that in a lot of the Novus Ordo parishes. And they're still under this impression that kids want to see bad Catholic pop music, which is really a ripoff of somewhat decent Protestant Christian pop music. And they don't get that. Kids don't want to see this watered down stuff. You can relate to it more than certainly that I could. But
yeah, I feel like even if I wasn't raised in the TLM, I would still find my way there because I'm traditional at heart. I'm like an old lady, but I'm not an old lady. I'm just like an old soul. So I love the traditionalism. I love that it's not about us, because I notice a lot of the times when I go to Novus Ordo parishes, they make it about us. And I'm like, it's not about us. It's about Christ. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter what you think, oh God. It's what he's literally asked us to do for him. We have that Sunday obligation. He has a specific way he likes to be worshiped. Now, obviously, not everyone's going to be able to go to a TLM. Like, that's just the fact. Like, especially with bishops and stuff cracking down on it now for absolutely no reason. It's harder and harder to find them. But people who do go to TLMs after being raised in the Novus Ordo hardly ever go back to Novus Ordo. Right. In my experience.
Yeah, no, I think that is very, very accurate. So let's go back to your wayward teenage years. So what you can be pretty vague on it, of course, because I don't want to pry, but like what convinced you to come back to the church?
A lot. Yeah. A lot of it, I would say, going through what I did in high school, there was a lot of stuff. And it went from like obviously I talked about it in my testimony at St. Patrick's, but the thing is that from 13 till about 18, I struggled with like body dysmorphia, which just means you don't see yourself the way you should. I always thought I looked fatter than I did, but there's like this whole thing, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, self-harm, like all this stuff. And when I was 18, it kind of just snowballed into like finally like all my friends left me because I started standing up for myself instead of being like a walking, a welcome mat or whatever you want to call it. And so basically I stopped being a pushover for a lot of my friends. And so my friend group left me. I didn't have support anymore. I didn't have friends who I could just call up and like, hey, I need, reassurance or anything. And what really convinced me to come back, I still don't know. I don't know what convinced me to come back because it was more of an act of faith than it was an act of, oh, I read this and I should come back,
Well, so during this time of tumult, were you going to mass with your parents? Were you doing the rosary? Were you just completely checked out of your Catholic life?
I was basically checked out. I do remember I started praying my rosary like a week before coming back. Because I just found it and I was just like, oh, I remember this. Like, this is cool. But I was completely checked out. The only time I went to mass was for social events or because I was a part of a youth group kind of at the time that was Catholic, but we didn't meet at a church. We just kind of met at each other's houses. Every now and then we would go to church for mass or something. That's basically the only time, other than holidays, that I would go. But but praying my rosary definitely helped me come back into the faith. Obviously, Our Lady leads us to Jesus. Like that's her mission. She wants us to be with her son, and so she'll lead us back to him. So in a way, it was almost like the Holy Spirit giving me enough faith to be able to go back to church and pray the rosary.
Your parents weren't forcing you to go during these years, or were they pulling like a Saint Monica and just praying for you? Just like
basically, yeah.
They could have made you go to mass. I mean, you're still under their roof during this time in your teenage years. They could have been like, I don't know what you're going through. You're still coming to mass on Sundays.
Yeah. No, yeah, basically Saint Monica situation.
And then you had this epiphany when you were 18. And then is that when you started having the idea of the content?
Yeah, that kind of came randomly. I started going back to church, and then like a week later, I was looking into the faith. I was looking for people my age who I felt like I could relate to, people who I felt like were talking about the faith, who could share their own experiences of what they went through. And then I could somehow connect myself with them and feel like I wasn't so alone, in this process. And I didn't find any at all. They were all, no offense, but they were all middle-aged men. And yeah, no offense. But I was definitely just kind of like, I don't mind listening, to Father Mike Schmitz or Catholic Answers, or even these, Ascension Presents people who are married, like Jackie and Bobby. Like, they were all great, but I'm like, but where's my generation? At this point I was 19. I'm like, where's my people? And so I went on TikTok. I tried finding people and I couldn't find any. And so I decided, I'm like, well, if I can't find anybody, maybe I should be that person. And so I made one TikTok about it was dumb. It was just about my church and like Chick-fil-A and my rosary. It was really dumb. But that blew up and I gained like thousands and thousands of followers overnight. And I was like, oh.
So you had the TikTok before you had the YouTube channel?
Correct. Yes.
Wow, I didn't know TikTok had been around. And this is the boomer in me. I didn't even know it's been around that long. And so So how many followers did you have on TikTok before you did this video? Did you have any TikTok videos before you did this video that went viral, or what?
No, I had like a couple that got like 100 views or something, but they were all like, basic, just lip syncing to songs. I don't know. It was really dumb. But I'm actually banned permanently off TikTok now. So
I remember I saw
can't
that
really
video.
find me on it. Yeah, I got banned at 103K. So it was and we decided not to get back on just because it was terrible for my mental health. And in general, it's such a degenerate app. It's literally a breeding ground for mental illness.
I know. I remember reading that Instagram is the most destructive app. And, the more time you spend on social media, the higher rate of body dysmorphia, eating disorders, plastic surgery, depression, anxiety. So you ask the teenagers, and we could talk about this, like with struggles with the kids, but like, you can bring this up to them. Like, the more time you spend on this, it is bad for you. But I mean, they make these devices to be addictive and it's like another organ to them. Like they can't live without it.
There's a lot of health problems that come with it, not just mental health. We have something that is known in my generation as phone neck, which is basically where everybody's like looking down at their phone like this for so long that their necks are being pushed forward and they look like praying mantises. You see it everywhere. People don't have posture anymore, and because of that, they're destroying like their neck and their back and their hips. I'm guilty of it too, because a lot of my work is done on the computer, so I go to my chiropractor a lot. Some other things is like the radiation we have from phones. We've known about it for a long time, but there's actually been no sufficient study done into the radiation. When you put your phone to your ear, the radiation goes like through your entire head, and it can cause brain fog, memory loss, a bunch of other things.
Well, cancer too. I mean, there's a correlation with acoustic neuroma. That's
correct.
And then it lowers sperm motility when men wear their phones near their waist. It can affect their sperm motility. So I'm glad you're kind of in that naturopath, holistic granola kind of mindset.
Yeah, I got to keep my phone 10 feet away.
I agree. I put it on airplane mode every night. I don't sleep with it. But let's go back to your TikTok video. It was Catholic related, Chick-fil-A Catholic related?
Yeah, it was just like a video of like I'm 100% Catholic, and then I like held up my Chick-fil-A cup or whatever and my rosary, and I just had a picture of like my church or whatever. And that one blew up. And then after that, I just started gaining more and more and more followers. I dabbled a little bit in politics because at that time it was more relevant to me, but I got away from that because it's a very toxic circle. And I really wasn't as passionate about politics as I was about Jesus. So I distanced myself from the politics and started focusing solely on, religion. And then from TikTok, I made a Instagram, and then from Instagram, I made Twitter. Didn't really use it all that much until recently. And then people started saying like, "Oh, we love your TikToks and everything, but can you make like longer videos? Because I feel like there's only so much you can get out of a 30-second clip." And I was just like, "Well, okay. I mean, if you guys are interested in me starting a YouTube channel, I'm down for that." And I got a lot of responses saying they would love that. So I started my YouTube channel. And then from there, my producer, manager Todd, he approached me with the idea of doing a podcast. And so that's where we are today.
So that's great. So how many followers on TikTok did you have at the point where you decided to create the YouTube channel?
I was probably at like 5,000 about. I Yeah, about 5,000. I was about at that halfway point where I was like, okay, I have enough followers where I feel like it would be substantial if I started, a YouTube channel. Um, but I also needed to make sure that people were interested in that, and it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to start this because like I want to start it. Like people, if I'm going to put the work in, it should be something that people are actually interested in,
Sure.
jumping over to.
So you have the YouTube channel. How many episodes do you think you have now over the last 3-4 years?
If I'm correct, I have nearly, man, there's so many. I would have to say maybe like 100, maybe more, probably more. I mean, I have my YouTube channel pulled up right now, but I'm like, I don't know. I'm scrolling through all of them, and there's so many. There's got to be more than 100. I don't know.
You would think the demographic on it, because I know there's that analytics page where you can look at the demo with the majority of the
Yeah.
people you think would be under 30.
So most of my followers, like when it comes to all of my social media, my followers range from like 15 to like 26. Like that is the majority of my range. I do have older people that do follow me, and they're fun. I like their input. They're cool. But yeah, most of my demographics are like 15, so like teenagers to like young adults. But I have had some like elderly people too, like ages like in their 60s, even in their 70s.
What do your parents think of all this?
They think it's really cool. They like it a lot.
I mean, it's an apostolate. You're evangelizing. I mean, that is our job. All Catholics and really all Christians are supposed to evangelize. So, what would you say is like the mission statement of the religious hippie? Like, what is the goal of your videos? Like, if you had to summarize it in 2 sentences, like, why do you have the YouTube channel?
Yeah, the main thing is to bring youth back into the church, to bring reverence back to the church and traditionalism back in. Um, that is like my main goal, is to bring the youth back into our faith, because there are so many youth who are suffering because in today's society, people think religion is taboo, basically. So kids aren't being raised with religion. And then when they come to understand that there is a God, and not just that, but he's a loving one, and he, just all these things that we're taught in Catholicism, they realize how much they've missed out, and they now are able to regulate their mental health. They're able to put their suffering towards something that matters. And so my whole thing is just bringing people back in who might have fallen away, might not have ever heard about it. And that's why the religious hippie is the way that it is, because people sometimes already have an idea of what Catholics are, and it's usually negative because of whatever's on the news. So not having Catholic in the title was really important for me, because I wanted to draw in people of all religions. And so far, so good. I mean, it's worked. I
Is
get
that why
emails
you
from a lot
picked?
of different religions.
Is that why you picked hippie? Because hippie has certain connotations that are not going to be religious at all.
No, so that came from a nickname. So I was originally called Hippie as a a teenager from my friends because of the way I dressed. And then when I came back into my faith, they were like, "Oh my gosh, you're like the religious hippie," and I was like, "We're gonna use that as a name now."
It's catchy.
But it kind of just stuck, and I liked it so much because I felt like, oh, this could draw people in from all different areas of life.
So do you think the majority of your subscribers are Catholics who strayed and came back, or do you have a certain segment of Protestants that are like asking legitimate questions? Do you have some trolls, like teenage or college age boy trolls that are just trolling you because you're a girl? Like, what's the demo you think mostly that you're getting?
All the above. I mean, I get it. I get all of it. I think the most I get though is like marriage proposals.
What do you mean marriage proposals? They want to propose to you.
Yeah. It's really weird.
That's not
Like I will
creepy.
just open my DMs and there'll be like 30 messages and out like and like 20% of them are just marriage proposals. And I'm just like,
Do you block them immediately, or do you entertain any of them by looking
I
at the
just
picture like,
delete
oh, you're
them.
cute?
I just delete them because I'm like, well, A, I don't have time for this, sweetheart. And B, you're too young for me. And C, no.
I have an episode I did call how romanticism has destroyed Catholic matrimony. So like most of my, I got like maybe 400 because I cranked out a lot in the last 6 months since I started. Most of them are apologetics 101, like going back to the Protestants and the misconceptions, which sometimes it's just outright lies I make about the church. But I do have a playlist on Catholic dating and Catholic living. But no doubt, like any guy that is proposing to you that doesn't know you, first of all, he thinks he knows you by watching your content. But he doesn't know your bad side and all the little foibles that we all have. And the fact that he thinks he loves you and is willing to propose, I mean, it kind of tells you about their mental health. Now, maybe some of them are joking, but I
I
mean,
mean,
if
don't
they
get
are
me
saying something,
wrong. I have met friends like on Twitter who have met like their significant others on Twitter. Like at least I can count like at least 5 on the top of my head who are getting married this year to somebody they met on Twitter. I'm not about that. I need to meet somebody in person.
well, like if they messaged you and DM'd you, say, Amber Rose, you're a great kind of role model for Catholic virtue. You're great. I love what you're doing. I live in Chicago. Maybe we can meet up sometime. I think you would maybe approach that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you would approach that radically different than, babe, let's get married. I want to marry you. I don't know you.
Debatable. I mean, it's debatable
Debatable.
just because I am very skeptical when it comes to men, because not that like all men are bad or anything like that. But the Catholic guys that I have met who are kind of like that, like, oh my gosh, I watch your YouTube video, they're a little unhinged. A little
What do
bit.
you mean?
Like, they're, I've had a couple people who ended up turning into stalkers because they randomly saw me once and they're like, oh my gosh, I saw you at church. And then all they do is just like email me forever and ever. I still get them. It's great. But on the other hand, females, when girls DM me, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the Chicagoland area. We should get coffee sometime. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And some of my best friends have come from situations like that, female friends. But when guys approach me on social media and they're just like, hey, I go to this church too and I saw you and da da da, and I'm like, cool. But they don't come up and say hi, but they just start trying to like start an internet friendship, but whenever they see you in person they're like, oh, I saw you again, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's
So from the manosphere perspective, we would say that those guys, well, they lack masculinity. They're what we call incels or involuntary celibates. So these are kind of the socially awkward guys who think that if they like something that you post, you're going to notice it and fall in love with them and check them out. Men have to be masculine. Men are the ones that have to court women. And so a lot of guys just lack that. It's a major problem because the women have been masculinized the last 60 years by cultural Marxist ploys. And then the women have been, the men have been, I should say, feminized, and the men have been masculinized, or the men have been feminized, the women have been masculinized.
yeah.
And so you just see a major problem. So like, women are looking for strong Catholic masculine role models. And I don't want to speak for you, but I would say that a lot of women are like, where are these guys? And then from the male perspective, there's a lot of guys who are like, all the women I know are thoughts, that hoe over there, just trashy girls that are sleeping with guys on the first date, and they exhibit no Christian virtue. So like both parties
Yeah.
are like, where am I going to find somebody? But
Right.
yeah.
I think it's difficult, especially with what, I mean, it also depends, because I have dated I have dated guys where I've had over 260 red flags in a month, and I've dated guys where it's just like they weren't masculine enough to actually like stand up and be men. They're just like, oh, whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. Like, I will do anything for you. And I'm like, don't give
Pedestalized.
me everything I want. That's not a good idea. If you give me everything I want, I'm going to get used to that.
Well, I mean,
Because
we
like,
could talk about dating because just dating for the 20-somethings. But I tell this to men that I know. It's like women want masculine men, men want feminine women. Men should not be doormats and pedestalize the woman that's exceedingly unattractive to women. Women want men that are strong, that will lead, that'll be head of the domestic church, and not just be always checking in. Is this okay? Is this okay? You want to do this? It's a major problem. But so when you're dating, are you dating to marry? Is it like are you like, I know you know Father Ripperger, but he's got
I
the
love
four
Father
stages
Ripperger.
of courtship.
Yeah.
Like he says like, do not kiss until you're engaged. He's got that very kind of, because sexual stuff's going to blind you from the red flags and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
are you dating to court, or like when you do contemplate dating a man, is it, you call it courtship? And I mean, have you thought about like that? Or
I have had bad experiences with courting, very bad ones. Whereas with dating, it's been a lot better. And that's mainly because I never say yes to a date if I don't feel like it. Like if I'm like, yeah, I don't like you like that, I let them know. I'm like, hey, I just don't see it like that. And I know there's some people like Tim Gordon was like, there should be no reason that you reject a date. Like you should just go out with them anyways. And I'm like, if I don't want to, I'm not gonna, because either they're gonna make me feel uncomfortable, I'm just not attracted to like something, right? And obviously physical attraction is not all that there is. But if I would rather be friends with somebody first and get to know them that way than have the expectations of, I don't know this person at all, but I'm dating this person so I can marry them. Kind of, I don't know if this is making sense. My main thing is that I like to go slow and steady. I don't like being rushed through everything. And then, like, the end goal is marriage. Obviously, I date to marry. Like, that is the main thing. But I'm not going to go out on dates with people who I could not see myself getting married to. I don't know if that makes
Well,
sense.
no, I mean that makes sense because you'd just be wasting your time if you went out
Right.
with a dad or some guy that you think would be a horrible, suitable husband.
You'd be surprised at how many guys get mad at me, though, for saying no.
Well, I mean that's men. I mean, men won't get unless they ask. So I mean, it's
It's crazy.
understandable.
Yeah.
So, have you ever dated a man to the point where you are in like stage one courtship, or you're calling it courtship, and or would you ever contemplate courting with a Protestant?
Yes and yes.
Wow.
So, yeah, I have met, here's the thing. I have really, really good Catholic guy friends who are devout Catholic guys and stuff, but we disagree on politics a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and so I view them as like great friends and everything, but I wouldn't date them because in certain aspects, um, it we just don't work, right?
Well, before you go to the Protestant, I'm curious, how would you not agree politically? Because most traditional Catholics are conservative politically,
Oh,
especially
I
on
mean more like when
the
it comes to homeschooling, when it comes to like vaccination things, when it comes to all of that, like kids stuff, when it comes to having kids, like, would you put them in school? I don't want to put my kid in school. Well, they would. There's like all these things where it's like we've discussed it. And even though if you were going to date them, there'd probably be some kind of, like you can meet in the middle somewhere. I'm not invested in any of them in the way of like, oh my gosh, like I like you so much, like we could totally find a loophole and like da da da. I see them as like brothers, which is really great. But also, I've met a lot of Catholic men who are just unhinged.
And is that because you're in the trad cath world? And my experience, there are some trad cath men who, yeah, maybe gone down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. Plus, maybe they kind of have that incel kind of background, or maybe they haven't had luck with women. I think like the trad cath women and men are. I don't want to like cast a general net, but there is a certain type that I don't know how to describe it. Maybe you can
There
explain.
is a lot of my experience with trad men, besides like maybe four, I've had red flags on like the first couple hours I've met them. They're extremely domineering, but in a very abusive way, physically
Oh,
and mentally. It's like they need to be in control. The woman has no say, and her place is the kitchen. And that's the end of the story. You have absolutely no say in the marriage at all. And you're basically being like shuffled around like cattle being sold for like, what's the best? Like, what's the best? And
tell us
so
what you really think.
it was insane. I was picked on for like being too skinny. People thought I was too fat. Um, Something about my hair wasn't long enough. My hair wasn't the right color. Um, there was just so many things that they would nitpick me on. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't ask you and we're not dating. So I'm sorry. Like these things though that you can't change about yourself, and that is one of the things that I've always struggled with is when they just believe that they have this authority to nitpick at women and be like, "Oh, you have to wear only skirts or you're not allowed to eat this." Like I once was made to bike 10 miles before I was allowed to eat by one of them. So this is like 20 men that I've met.
So you think there are traditional Catholic men are just have major control and abusive issues, and they kind of hide behind the traditional gender norms
I
of the
think
biblical marriage?
I think what they're trying to do is I don't believe that all of them are ill intent. I think they're trying to follow the traditional norm of like being the head of the household, but because they don't have any examples of that in their own life, whether their dads weren't there or because they haven't had any good role models, they're falling into this controlling behavior because they don't actually know what it means to be a leader of a household, and my suggestion is always to look at Saint Joseph. He's humble and he's a quiet man. He doesn't say anything in the Bible, but he still has a presence, and his presence is important. He's a provider and protector, not just mentally and physically, but also spiritually.
But you are looking for a husband that is the head of the domestic church, that is the leader of the marriage, or are you not looking for that?
No, 100%. I mean, that's the main thing. It's, the whole hierarchy umbrella. It's God, man, woman, kids. But when it comes to decision making, the woman should also be involved in it. It shouldn't just be like,
Absolutely.
oh, I'm going to go buy a $50,000 car and not tell my wife. Like, don't do that.
The way I look is like the sexes complement themselves, right?
Yeah.
So the man should be the head because they can look at a school. There's one principal. Look at the commander in chief, right? Everywhere you look, the head coach. There's got to be one person. Too many chefs in the kitchen ruin the food.
Mm-hmm.
So the man is the leader, but he listens and courts and desires the input of his wife. He understands that his wife's going to have certain strengths that he does not have, and just the essence of being a woman, and also just her personality. She's going to have strengths, and then he listens to that input and ultimately just ruminates on that and then decides to either defer to her and agree with her, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't agree with her and says, look, I'm going to make the decision I think it's best for our marriage and best for the family. But he should
Right.
always take in the input. I don't get these
Yes.
unilateral my way or the highway tradcasts.
It doesn't work. I think a lot of people, I've met a lot of guys who think about marriage as they have an iron grip on the woman and like
Yeah.
she has to go to him if she wants to make any decision. You want a peanut butter like sandwich for lunch? Ask your husband first. You want to go for a walk with the kids? Ask your husband first. And I'm like, men don't like real traditional men do not like that. They want a woman who can think for herself, can make decisions for herself, and obviously in the matters of like, oh my gosh, should I give little Timmy watermelon or cantaloupe today? Should I call my husband for that? Like, that's not attractive. Okay, we should be able to think for ourselves and to do decisions, make decisions like this, like, oh, I'm going to take the kids to the zoo today, or I'm going to do this or that. When it comes to like bigger things like family vacations and stuff like that, obviously the wife is going to need input from the husband. But if you notice, women are usually the ones that plan those family vacations, and then the men handle the logistics of it, like plane tickets, where we're going to stay, things like that. Um, and so they're complements each other, but women should be able to think for themselves and not have to go to their man every single time they're like, oh, I have a decision to make. Like, if that makes
Well,
sense. Like,
what's your experience with trad Catholic women? Do you find that a lot of women at your parish or just in general are like that, where they're almost like they can't make decisions on their own and they
mm-hmm.
have to go to their husband or their boyfriend or whatever to make decisions for them?
Yep. I mean, not necessarily at the parishes I go to, but a lot of the parishes that I have visited and I've seen and I've experienced, they always need the input from a man. Always. They're like, I don't know if I should start veiling. Like, what do you think? Or I don't know. Like, do I need to go to confession? Like, should I have carrot cake or a brownie? They always need a man's input. And I'm just like, girl, what do you have a taste for? And they're like, I kind of want a brownie. And I'm like, get the brownie and eat it. And then the guy will be like, no, I think you should have carrot cake because it's a vegetable and it's healthier for you. And she's like, oh, I'll have the carrot cake. And I'm like, literal conversation I've had. So
Do you have secular friends that just think that it's a complete joke that you want to be an obedient wife and you don't want to change marriage vows and what you don't want to work and have kids? Do you have any of those influences in your life too, or are you mostly around just trad Catholic women?
God's removed a lot of those people from my life, thank goodness, because I didn't have the strength to do it myself.
Yeah.
But I online with what I do and stuff, I definitely get a lot of it more from the men than from the women. Because men are like, don't you want to be like a businesswoman and stuff, like women empowerment? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't need social justice warriors. Okay, I'm good. I'm good where I'm at. I would not survive at a 9 to 5 job because I've tried it, and at the risk of my mental health, I've quit like a year later at every single one. So it's I have gotten it before, but it's mostly from men. I don't get it from women as much.
So I think you make a good point. A lot of women, especially the more feminist one, admit it's like they don't like making big decisions in their life. Big decisions make you or make women anxious lots of times. And sometimes, like something with work, like if you don't like to work, that's not really your forte. It's not to say that women can't excel. Certainly, we have
Mm-hmm.
excellent female leaders and doctors, but men, like our whole raison d'etre, our whole existence is productivity,
Correct.
working. That's how we define ourselves, right? And women aren't wired that way. It doesn't mean that women can't work, but you guys are just wired different. And
Yep.
feminists don't, feminists are like, if a man can do it, a woman can do it, da, 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 da. And it's just lead to so much marital and sex discord, fighting
Yeah.
amongst the sexes.
Yeah, I think also because if needed, I mean, sorry, not if needed. In my experience, when I have talked with women, a lot of my friends are now newly married who have worked and stuff. Um, if they're not working in like a organizational like pro-life movement, if they're not working in a pro-life movement, if they're not working at their church or something like that, they're miserable. They'd rather be home with their kids. If they're not working at an organization that makes them feel fulfilled, like they're actually making a difference in the world, most of the time they'd rather be home with their kids. I have friends who work in the pro-life movement. Some of them already have kids, others have kids on the way. And I'm like, well, would you continue doing this once you have kids? And they're just like, I love it so much and I want to raise my kids in it. So yes. But then other friends who work in like corporate jobs, they're like, as soon as I have this baby, I'm out. Like I'm quitting because I want to be a mom and that's all I want to do. I don't want to leave my kid at daycare being raised by a stranger, 8 hours a day. I want to be a mom. I want to do these things. And most of those women feel so fulfilled in that task of being a mom and being a homemaker more than they ever did, stocking shelves or being at a corporate business.
But you hear that commonly with a lot of women. It's like when I'm working, I feel like I'm an inadequate mom, and then when I'm at home, I feel like I'm an inadequate, worker.
Yeah.
You can't have it, but just let the man work and let the woman stay at home. I mean, there's a reason traditional gender norms have existed for millennia. They've
Well, a lot
worked.
of people nowadays are saying, oh, well, we can't make it on a one income household. Yes, you can. You really, really can. You have to make some cutbacks, like not eating out all the time. Don't buy the kids every single thing they see in Walmart. Cut back on fancy dish soaps or like, some things that you really enjoy. Get rid of some subscriptions. Get rid of your TV altogether. Just throw it out the window. That's a great way to do it. But in general, there are so many cuts that we can make in our budgets that the amount of money we spend, it's so easy to spend money and not even know it with online shopping and things. Kids don't need 40 pairs of shoes. Kids don't need 50 dresses or 30 shirts, or they're completely content with like 5 pants, 5 good shirts, and like a couple pairs of shoes that are versatile. Obviously, that's on the lower end. But also hand-me-downs are really, really great. I remember we literally shopped at Goodwill until I was like 17 and I could afford my own clothes kind of thing, from shopping. But even then I go to these stores, these retail stores nowadays, and the clothes are either see-through, or they're like, but the see-through clothes are like $50. And I'm like, so where's the rest of it? Like, why is it see-through
Why
if
am I
it's $50?
paying more for less fabric?
So it's one of those things where it's like, kids don't need clothes from Kohl's, and babies, they grow out of their clothes so fast. You really don't need to get them like 70 outfits, they're completely fine in like a white onesie, and maybe not white, but like a onesie and like a couple shirts, because they're going to grow out of it in like a month anyways.
Yeah, it just shows the attachment that the parents have to mammon, to money, when they say that they can't rely on one income. It's really, they love all the just the stuff that they have, the nice TVs and the nice cars, and they just don't want to give that up.
It's
Right? They're like
comfort.
the rich man. They're like the rich man that Jesus comes to. I think they have way too much attachment, and that's what it really means. Because people think of our ancestors. We had smaller houses with bigger families, and now we have big houses with smaller families.
It's
Our
true.
ancestors did
And
it, so.
also, kids are happier with less things. I've noticed this. I babysit for so many families, and the families that I babysit for the most are usually the ones that have, or the kids that I babysit that are like the happiest are the ones who have very minimal things. They might have one doll that they love to death and they play with it every single day. And they might have like a couple stuffed animals that they put on their bed or something, but they don't have like 70,000 dolls, or they don't have build blocks and then this. They learn the responsibility of taking care of toys, and if they don't take care of it, then it goes to Goodwill, or it gets broken and they don't get another one. They learn these responsibilities, so then they actually learn like, oh, if I break something, you know I don't know, it teaches them a little grown-up lesson, but while still being a kid. Because something that I saw today is that people are getting, what was it? It's basically like people are growing up but aren't maturing. And they need to be together. Like, people need to grow up and mature, but because a lot of parents cradle their kids and like give them whatever they want and silver spoon and all this stuff, I mean, they could have like 70,000 Barbies. They could have Disney Plus and all these other apps, and they could have unlimited access to their iPads or whatever. And because their parents are like, oh, like, you can do whatever you want, like, just don't throw a tantrum or whatever. These kids, like, these poor kids are just so accumulated to instant gratification that when you take it away, they don't know what to do. They can't just be
Great point.
content being outside.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember growing up, we had what we would call free range parenting. Nowadays, like your mom would just say, go play, come back at night.
Mm-hmm.
And now, you see the helicopter moms and dads. You can't leave the house. They watch too much nightly news, so they think there's more crime than there was in the 70s and 80s. But in fact, there was much more violent crime back then.
Oh yeah,
So
it just
if
wasn't
you're
broadcast.
right, if you're a free range parent now, and you're like, hey, my 11-year-old, just go to the park. Some nosy mom or dad sees the kid, calls the cops, you get in trouble. Like, it's just a different world.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So going back to the Protestants, so you would get engaged to a Protestant with the the condition that he would convert, or would you just marry a Protestant?
I have met Protestants who are more devout in their faith and more supportive of Catholicism than I have met Catholic men. And it's insane. It's actually insane. And there, of course, are Protestants out there that are not like that. But in my experience, the friends that I have more Protestant friends than I do Catholic friends, who are always interested in the faith. They're like, oh my gosh, what did you learn about? What was your homily about this week? Can I see your priest? He's so cool. Like, they're so supportive of me. Whereas my Catholic guys, so to speak, they are, how do I put this? They're like, why are you on social media? That's such a pride thing. You're so prideful. Like, why would you be on social media? They're so derogatory. And the guys who are Protestant, who I'm friends with and stuff, they're just like, oh my gosh, like, that's so cool that you evangelize your faith on social media. I've never heard of anybody like doing that, with what you do, how we do it. And I've gotten way more support from Protestants than I have from Catholics, in the sense of like the dating realm. Also because as Catholics, we recognize Protestant baptism if it's done properly. You can have a sacramental. You can have a sacramental marriage. Obviously, there's rules like the kids need to be raised Catholic. You still have to get married in the church. Like there's a lot of things that still go into it. But yeah, I mean, as long as those things are fulfilled, they understand that the kids need to be raised in Catholicism. They're willing to support that and take us to church and do all of those things. Totally fine with that.
Do you not worry though? I mean, I just see it from like a more father perspective here. Like maybe if it's a lukewarm Protestant, but if you were with a hardcore Calvinist who believes in sola fide, sola scriptura, and all this, I just see a lot of tension. I mean, this is why the church says you need to get dispensation to marry a non-Catholic, is because they foresee that there's going to be tension. So yes, he could say, yeah, we can raise the kid Catholic. Then you have the kid Catholic, and he's like, no, we're going to raise him Calvinist or Mormon or whatever.
Again, it depends on who you marry. Because if you already know that they're like that, why would you marry them? But if you already have this agreement that like this is what you want, and they're completely supportive of that, and they're just like, yeah, I agree that, because you're not going to just marry a complete stranger who's like, oh yeah, we'll raise him Catholic, sure. And then you get into the marriage, they're like, I changed my mind. Like you wouldn't marry somebody like that, you know, if you're a devout Catholic.
There's something called the bait and switch. So I think you need to be wary, because you're right. There are some Protestants that look, you're Catholic, the kids will be Catholic, maybe I'll even convert. But there is a reason with the wisdom of the church that says that Catholics should only marry Catholics, because more often than not, it does lead to tension later on. And maybe that tension is going to be in a very kind of nascent form early on. But you don't know, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, they can become just virulent anti-Catholic Protestants, and that's your husband. So it's a possibility. I'm not saying that you're not vetting well and you pick the wrong guy, but this can happen anytime. And of course, you can marry a Catholic who's going to leave the faith 10 years from now.
I've seen it both ways. I come from a long line of mixed marriages in my family, and all of them have always been very devout Catholics, and the Protestants have always come along with it and have never had an issue with it. My dad's a living example of that. His dad was Protestant, his mom was a devout Catholic, and he always took him to church, and he went to Catholic school and all these things. So yes, there's always a possibility of that. But when you're married for life. And the other thing is if you sort these things out beforehand, you need to understand that like these promises and stuff, because also in the church, if you do, like, he doesn't have to agree to wanting to raise the kids Catholic. He just has to be aware of it, right? For me, I'm like, you have to agree, because that's my own little tidbit there. But I've also had Catholic guys who have told me like, you're going to be in charge of like all of this, and I'm not going to participate at all. Like you're going to have to raise the kids Catholic. I'm not going to go to church with you, because I'm going to go to my own church and have my own guys group. And also if there's football playing on Sunday, you know, I'm totally going to go play football instead. And I'm like, what? Sunday obligation means nothing to you and you call yourself a Catholic? Like, so it can go both ways. Like you said, you definitely need to know who you're marrying though. If you are having doubts about the marriage, you really shouldn't be marrying them. And you need to get these things out. That's why pre-Cana is so important, and the dispensation, like you said. But the main thing is that you really need to be careful in general about who you marry, like with the no-fault divorce these days, and with like all these other issues that are popping up. Why would you marry somebody that, you know, would leave you later on? Of course, some things happen, like people enter marriage for life, and then something happens and they get an annulment or whatever. Like sometimes stuff happens. Sometimes marriages aren't valid, but for the most part, we go into marriages thinking this is for life, and then somebody changes, you know, and we need to pray for them that they return back, because even if one of the people leaves the marriage, like on Relevant Radio, there's tons of examples of this where a man left his wife, or a wife left, you know, her husband, and the guy calls in, he's like, well, I'm going to stay celibate because obviously I'm still married because we don't have an annulment or dispensation or whatever. But the other one is off gallivanting, dating already, and doing all these things. And so we, you know, there's trickiness. People can change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worst. But in my experience from mixed marriages and from my friends' own mixed marriages and things, sometimes if the parent who is Protestant is very supportive of the Catholicism. The kids aren't confused at all. And that's, again, why it's so important to hash things out before getting engaged in things. I used to be adamant about like only dating Catholics and stuff, and then I started dating only Catholics, and I was like,
well, maybe you should talk to your priest about this. See how your priest feels about you potentially marrying a Protestant.
Oh, he's fine with it.
Is he?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think?
Conversation.
Why do you think divorce is so common among Catholics? I mean, if you look at the numbers, we're almost up there with the secularists. I mean,
well, the first thing is divorce doesn't exist in the Catholic Church. Annulment does, but divorce itself doesn't. That's just in like the modern world, secular world. So technically there needs to be something that makes the marriage invalid in order for there to be an annulment or something of that nature. So the lady marries the guy only for his money and doesn't tell him, or he used to be like a prostitute or something and never told her that. Like those are areas for getting annulment. Divorce rates in general, annulment rates are high. And one of the main reasons is because, it's so hard because I feel like there's so many reasons. Like the secular world, other times they get married like super.
Hold on, Ambrose, we got a call coming in. Someone's calling in. Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Thank you for calling in.
Hey, Gregory, I'm actually going to, David, I'll be with you on Tuesday. And I'm just watching your conversation. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I belong to a Catholic group here in Dallas, and I met a guy about a week ago who came in and said that he was in the process of getting an annulment, and he had married a Protestant. And I guess he really didn't care about being Catholic at all, and that obviously led to their disintegration of their marriage after just 9 months. And what he talked about is when they went through the pre-Cana process, one of the big things that they focused on was that book, The 5 Love Languages, which I have a real issue with because it's not based on Catholicism at all. It was written back in like the early 90s, and it's sort of it's lack of a better term, it's sort of a woo-woo kind of thing. I don't know or understand what goes on in pre-Cana. I've talked to many couples who've gone through it, and they tell me they just talk about these are the problems that you might face, but it isn't like the realistic problems that people see. Like you're not like they don't really talk about men being tempted constantly in their lives, or what if your husband loses his, like the things that you talk about on your channel, Gregory. They don't really address that. And talking about the 5 love languages, I think, is the real issue going through pre-Cana. So, what did you experience when you went through pre-Cana, and is that anything that you think is the problem?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm going to let you go. Thank you.
Right, thanks.
So, God, this is 20 something years ago I did pre-Cana. My impression in general, the Novus Ordo marriage prep is that it's woeful. And most of the time the couples already have the wedding date set. And no matter what comes out in engagement weekend or whatever, the online thing they're doing, they're going to get married no matter what. And I think, like he said, a lot of it is just kind of mealy mouth, vague prep. And it's not really talking about the indissolubility of marriage. And I think, Ambrose, this is why I was asking that question about the divorce. Is I think, in my opinion, Catholics get divorced at a high rate because we've been infiltrated by secularist values so much in the church, but definitely in marriage. Catholic, and part of it is no fault divorce. So you could divorce a guy if he coughs the wrong way. I could divorce a woman if she flatulates in front of me. In the old days prior to 1970, you needed a reason for divorce. Now there's no reason.
Right.
And so when you have this temptation always dangling of being able to leave when things get bad, and there's normally a financial payout, and then there's you might get alimony money, child support money. I just think it makes it really tempting when you have this financial payout plus the kind of the secular view of Catholic marriage is I'll love you forever, but really we know that doesn't always happen, and I think we have to make divorce hard again on some level.
I think that could go for a lot of things, you know, divorce and a bunch of other things in the church that we really need to crack down on and make kind of rigid almost again to just drive the importance of those things, because marriage is a sacrament and marriage is forever. And some annulments get denied. You know, a lot of them can get
Very
denied.
few.
Yeah.
Very few.
Really?
It's around 75% success rate in a typical Novus Ordo parish. Now, if you go to SSPX, they have their own. If you go to the more Latin ones, but I mean,
Okay.
you
That
can
makes
look
sense.
this up. It ranges 70, 75%. So what typically happens is Catholic couple gets married, there's disillusionment, maybe the other person was projecting qualities and that they wanted the other person to have they never had, or, you know, there's a wide variety of reasons why people divorce. Then they might fall for an annulment, or they might just get the civil divorce and then go to the evangelical megachurch when they find the next person, and they will marry you in a heartbeat. They don't even look at Matthew 19, where Christ is exceedingly clear, those who remarry commit fornication and adultery. They're just like, yeah, no, we need people in the pews here, so we'll remarry you. So it's a major problem. So they'll just go to another church, leave Catholicism, because they're just thinking about my will, instead of understanding that there's a reason why the church believes in the indissolubility of marriage, the permanence of marriage, and I need to defer my will to the will of the church founded by Jesus Christ, instead of the church having to conform its will to my will. And this is the mindset of the liberal Catholic in general. Okay. Yeah, the church teaches this on abortion or on gay marriage, but you know, they're wrong, I'm right.
Right.
And it's exceedingly frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that's also why it's important to crack down on the dogmas that we believe as Catholics. I mean, we have so many of them, and you need to believe all of them in order to constitute being a Catholic. Because dogmas are those things that you need to believe in order to call yourself Catholic. I mean, obviously, we have baptism and all that stuff. But one thing that I always enjoyed was the fact that a lot of people, here's the thing, they put their kids through the sacraments only so that they can get married in the church one day, but the kids never go to church again after going to the, you know, their confirmation. And so because of that, they're like, oh my gosh, it'd be so nice if we got married in a church, but I haven't gone to church in like 30 years, but now I'm getting married. So I don't know any priests. I don't know what I should be doing. I didn't know that there were all these rules and regulations and things like that. They have, like you said, a very secular idea of what marriage is from all these romance novels and all of these Twilight movies and all these things.
I need to get married in a barn. I need to get married in the beach. What? The church doesn't allow that? I'm leaving.
Yeah. And also you have to get a dispensation for that, like if you're not going to get married in the church. But the main thing is that I'm racking up like priests that I know to get different perspectives on pre-Cana, because I'd rather be one-on-one with a priest for pre-Cana than in a group, because I have gone to a couple counseling groups, you know, for marriage and things, and I've just sat in back just to see what it's like, because I've always told myself, like, before signing up for a class or something, like, see if you can just shadow it and sit in the back, because I'd rather see what I'm getting into rather than just like, oh yeah, it's a pre-Cana class, and I'm like, okay, but what are we learning? Like, can I just sit? And 9 out of 10 times I'm allowed to sit in for like the first class. And every single time I'm like, you know what? I would prefer to do this one-on-one with a priest, because I feel like I would get more out of it. And I don't think a lot of people know that you can do pre-Cana with a priest one-on-one, because sometimes it's structured where it takes 6 months to a year, but you can easily get through all the pre-Cana stuff in like 3 months if you do it with a priest.
I think pastorally, and that's good to know. And I agree. Like if it's a very orthodox, well-educated priest, I definitely recommend that. I mean, we do have, unfortunately, a lot of, I guess I like to call change agent priests who, they have a different view. But pastorally, the divorce and remarriage thing is such a major problem, because if you see it like a priest, the guy's like, well, I divorced my wife or she divorced me, because statistically women initiate divorce 70 to 90% of the time, and it's 90% when she's college educated. But so let's say a woman divorces a man, and then he finds a new woman and then remarries her, but not in the church, and then has a family, has a kids with them, and then he wants to receive the sacraments, and the pastor's like, well, you need to get an annulment. And it's so sticky, because so you're saying I have to have a Josephite marriage until this annulment comes through, and there's a potential that the annulment isn't going to come through, and therefore my marriage is invalid. I'm going to the evangelical church. And instead of just understanding, well, you made a mistake, you shouldn't have remarried, you should
There's
have
a
followed.
pride issue.
It's a pride issue, but it's pastorally, it's difficult for a priest because the priest has to tell them the truth, and a lot of priests don't tell them the truth. But the priest is going to be, I'm sorry, this marriage is not a marriage, it's a civil marriage. And yes, you must have a Josephite relationship. And so this is why you see like the German schism, the German bishops over there who want to have divorce and the divorced people receive the Eucharist. It's a major issue. I mean, I don't think we all have time to flesh out the whole thing, but I will tell you this, like in most Catholic parishes, if you want to get married, they will tell you that you need to go through pre-Cana before, or they'll say set the date and then do pre-Cana. And I think that's a major problem because pre-Cana's job is to figure out if she's got red flags, if I have red flags, if we're not compatible and all these things.
Right. And I also feel like a lot of those things can be solved if you don't rush through the dating process. Thoroughly get to know the person. Like, obviously not on the first date, ask them about like if they've ever killed anybody. But, you know, a lot of these things, you're not going to trust somebody on the first or second date unless you were friends beforehand. And so sometimes we have walls up because if we start dating somebody or something, we want to put the best image of ourselves out there and be like, we do
ambassador.
This. And so because of that, I've noticed, this is just my own personal thing that I've noticed, after about 3 months, that's when the person's real personality starts coming out. Other people are sooner, other people are sometimes later. Like we've heard of abuse situations where the man or the woman is perfect throughout the entire dating process, but a couple years into marriage, boom, something snaps and they just become super abusive. Sometimes it has to do with underlying mental health issues. But the main thing is it's like, get acquainted with their family, know what their family's like, see how they treat other people, and just get to know them, but don't rush that process. I feel like so many people are on like this ticking time clock of like, the faster I get it done, the faster it's going to go. But really, this is somebody you're going to spend the rest of your life with. You should really be taking the time to get to know them properly. And if you need to go to like couples counseling or something to sort those Catholic couples counseling, of course, then it's important to really know the person. Again, things happen, things do happen, but you can take the precautions to keep those, I don't know how to explain it, but there are steps you can take to prevent like annulments and stuff if you really get to know the person well enough and be like, okay, we work or we don't work. But that's rarely going to happen on the second date if you guys are compatible, I
think like with the annulment issue, I mentioned it's 70-75% because the old annulments used to be, there had to be deception before the vows. Like a lot of non-Catholics, even some Catholics don't understand, like he cheated on me, I want an annulment. Well, no, that's not how it works. It has really nothing to do with what happened during the marriage. So in the old days, it was like the shotgun wedding or some form of deception. Now, typically the marriage tribunals will look at lack of consent based on emotional stunted behavior based on childhood trauma. So that's why the number's so big, because if you use that criteria, I mean, what people didn't have childhood trauma that somehow theoretically affected their ability to give consent. And so you've seen, like, since Vatican II, again, going back to Vatican II, I'm not blaming Vatican II for this, but certainly the annulment rates have shot up dramatically. And, the church decides it, then you abide by the church, whether or not it's yes or no. I went once to an SSPX mass, and I was talking to the priest. He's like, well, if most Catholics got their annulment through here, it'd be like a 10% success rate. Right. I was like, yeah, you're probably right, but Holy Mother Church is Holy Mother Church. But
no, it's true.
Let's. I do want to cover a couple things before we go here. Like, so, what are the tips you think to attract the youth? You're young. Your groups. I'm going to say your subscribers are all young. You have experience with them. Is it just take them to the TLM, see the beauty of the TLM? And what are your tips?
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of the people show a huge interest in the traditional Latin Mass when I do talk about it. They're like, oh, I was raised in the Novus Ordo, but I've never really felt a connection there because like it's always so about like the people and not about Christ and stuff. It's not as reverent. And so when I talk about that, they're super into the traditionalism in the sense of like going to the TLM and veiling and things like that. I think the other thing is that we really need to make mental health relevant to the youth, and that the church is a place for healing, because mental health is like taboo in a lot of church circles, but so many young people suffer from it, whether it's mental illness, depression, pornography addiction, all these things. And yet so many parishes don't want to talk about it. And I think being raw and real with these teenagers is something that will draw them in, because they need to know that forgiveness is out there for them. And there's a place for that, through church.
So how would they do that? Would you want the churches to have youth groups, and that's where they'll address it, or address it in homiletics, or like how would they
I
address
think homilies are really important, because kids are going to be there every week. If their parents take them, kids might not automatically go to the youth groups if they're there. But I also think, so in homilies, yes, it's helpful. And I have one priest who does amazing homilies like that. Like, he touches on really relevant topics that like teenagers struggle with, and his masses are packed with young adults and teenagers because of his homilies. But also, I think it's important to have those youth groups, and stuff. I know it can be hard for churches to run youth groups, because you need people for that, you need money for that, you need to be able to do it every week or have a consistent schedule. And it's hard. I get that. I'm a part of a youth group, and the people who run it sometimes ask me for help, because they're like, we can't make it, or we don't have ideas. And I'm like, I got you. It's okay. But youth groups are really important, and not just youth groups that are like, oh, I'm just going to hang out with my friends and eat pizza. Like youth groups that are structured and have a purpose. Like, join us, next week for our youth group where we're going to discuss mental health and, blah, blah, blah. I think that can be really helpful. And also allowing some of the students to actually, like, if they're comfortable enough, talk about their own experience with it, so that other kids feel like they might not be alone. There's like a bunch of things. I have a bunch of youth group ideas in my head, but
it's interesting you bring up the groups, because like I know Protestants who've converted, and that's one of the hardest transitions, because like the evangelical churches, it's just fellowship because they don't have sacraments. So it's all fellowship. Then they come to the truth. They're like, but you guys don't have any groups. Most parishes have very little outreach. Yeah. And even to the point where like when they go into the mass, and I try to explain, the mass is vertical. Fellowship isn't important. I could have President Biden next to me, and I really shouldn't care. It's all vertical. But it's such a hard thing for a lot of churches to have outreach for the youth and just for anybody. I wish they would work on that.
Me too.
And so the struggles with the young Catholics. So you think the number one thing is mental health?
Mental health and pornography addiction. Those are the two biggest ones.
No one talks about porn.
Nope. Yeah. Because it's a very taboo subject, and parents don't want to talk about it with their kids. They're like, that's an uncomfortable that's an uncomfortable talk. And I'm like, either you're going to have it with them, or their public school's going to have it with them, and they're going to get the wrong idea, or they're going to go out and search for it.
And you think, going back to attracting the youth, so the liturgy is going to attract them. Do you think having a more like precise teaching on the dogma, especially on the social teachings, like gay marriage, transgender, abortion, all these things, is that going to bring them in, or in the world that we live in, that's going to push them away if we talk about these things?
I think it's hard to tell, because I have a priest, Father Nathan, who goes to St. John Cantius, and he did a beautiful homily about how everybody is welcome at our church, but, we're all sinners, and we all have, that problem. And he touched on like homosexuality being a sin and like all these things, but how they're still very welcome, to be in our church, and to I don't know how to explain it really, but like he made it in a very loving and tasteful way. Some priests are like brick and or brimstone and fire, where it's just like, you can't do this, and like you're going to hell and blah blah blah. I've never really met too many priests like that, but I've met like at least 3 maybe. And I've always been like, ooh, that's not going to sit well with the youth. But when you do it in a loving way, like, we love you, but, we all have our own sins, and homosexuality, is a sin in the sense of acting upon it. Being a homosexual itself is not a sin, but of acting upon that is what's sinful. And we all have our own temptations. I mean, heterosexual people, we have temptations to lust after people, women and men. I mean, because like women can lust after other women, even if you're a heterosexual, because you're like, I want her body, I want her hair, I want her eyes. And in reality, she's probably not even real and she's all photoshopped.
Right.
And then men can lust after women, women can lust. Like, we all have our own temptations. And it's important to know that you are still a child of God and you are welcome, but we ask you to, fight these temptations and these sins. And so there are a lot of support and help groups out there for people like that if they want help, but they're, of course, never forced into it. But just to know that they have a place to come and that they're welcome, it's important. Because they are children of God still, and while we don't support their sin, we still love them. Love the sinner, hate the sin.
And I think it's got to be reminded too with the whole gay marriage thing. Is like heterosexual people are expected to be chaste until marriage. Like nobody's supposed to be having any sexual activity unless you have the sacramental bond of marriage. And I think that needs to be reminded. So I don't know, like a pastor, I think it'd be so difficult because you have this fine line, especially with homosexual marriage, because everybody's been infiltrated by the secular view. We have obviously legal gay marriage here. And it's like, well, why does the church hate gays? You get these questions. I get these questions on the apologetics. Like, why does the church hate gays? Why does the church hate transgenders? And that is the narrative. And so we're already on defensive mode.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard part, is trying to explain the theology of the body, trying to explain the Catholic teaching, because many of these people think the church is just obscurantist. The church just wants to keep us down. The church doesn't want us to find true love, blah, blah, blah. And it's hard to already have that narrative. So we have to like control the narrative from the beginning. But I mean, like with the gay marriage narrative, I mean, I don't think we're going to win that. I think that's a ship, kind of like sexual liberation. I think that's a ship that's gone. I don't know. Maybe you don't agree, but
I think it depends too, because more and more information comes out nowadays about how like was it like close to 70% of people who do transition surgery end up committing suicide like a few months later. There's more information coming out about it now that people who are reverse trans and things like that are talking about their conversions to the faith and why they're going back to their original gender. And I think there is some movement that maybe later on, when all of this all the more information starts coming out about this topic, that people will start having their eyes open to this. But then, of course, that gets counteracted with apps like TikTok, where like this stuff is literally publicized and glorified to young people. And so the young people think like, oh, this is like what I'm meant to support. Like, we're supposed to support this. And they're raised knowing that, even if they're Catholic. I mean, they're infiltrated by all these apps and things that are, telling them that if you don't support gay marriage, then you're homophobic.
Wow.
And, and they don't want to be homophobic. I don't want to be homophobic. I don't want to be mean, but me having a different opinion than you does not make me homophobic. It just makes me a free thinker.
That's the narrative, though. But the narrative is you are a homophobe if you don't support this radical agenda, and that's the problem. And so, if you had a 12-year-old, 13-year-old daughter, would you allow her on TikTok or any social media?
Here's the thing: is like, I got social media when I was 14. TikTok wasn't out until I was 16 or 17, and so I wasn't like raised on it or anything like that. I was just something I discovered. At that point, I was already thinking for myself and I already knew what I believed. But I mean, Instagram, TikTok, those two, like, no, absolutely not, until like they're actually old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong. Because the amount of like 16-year-olds that get into online trouble all the time because their parents never restrict their internet access. I mean, my parents restricted mine and I still got into trouble. So, and I know how sneaky kids can be. And so when I watch the kids that I watch sometimes, not necessarily the families I watch now, but in the past, I've seen kids who have no restriction at all on iPads and phones and
television shows.
And they're watching TV shows at the age of like 6 that I wasn't allowed to watch till I was 14. Like,
I know you have an episode on like shows that are bad for Catholics to watch. You're probably familiar with Euphoria because Euphoria is gigantic with your age demo. That show makes me want to vomit, and I hate that show. And I
I
know people.
haven't seen it,
Oh,
which
you
is probably
haven't
a
watched
blessing.
it?
No, I haven't seen it mainly because that series that I have, TV shows and movies that I regret watching as a Catholic, that series I have on my YouTube channel, I love doing that series because there's so many. There's so
Yeah,
many. And
unfortunately.
I keep coming up with more and more that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember watching that and ooh. But Euphoria is one of those that I'm like, should I like test it to see what people are talking about? Should I not? And I always go back to I should not because it in general, it does not appeal to me like to be watching that type of thing. I feel like there's better things I could be doing with my time. I have watched other bad movies like The Vampire Diaries and things like that for research purposes. But I wouldn't specifically sit down and watch it to be like, oh my gosh, let me see if I regret watching this or not. Because there are like when I do classes and things, they're like, oh, you have to pick a degenerate TV show and write the Christian worldview versus the secular worldview about it. And I'm like, I know so many. And so I try to pick the most popular ones, which is like The Vampire Diaries, Twilight, Family Guy. I don't know. But I always just watch it and I'm like,
No.
eh.
Okay. But those are mild. Euphoria, just if you watch the first episode, I mean, it just all it does is glorify adolescent drug use, adolescent sex, sex with older men. I mean, it is insidious. It's truly from the devil.
I feel like a lot of the times, because I don't watch this much TV on a regular basis, like if I watch TV, it's usually YouTube videos that are aesthetically pleasing because why not? But when I do watch TV, they're like older shows like The Rifleman and I Love Lucy. Um, One thing I will say though is I feel
You
like
are an old lady in a young woman's body if you're
I
watching.
know I had a gray hair the other day. I was sad. But the thing is I feel like they've been leading up to this.
Yeah,
They've slowly been sneaking this type of thing into young rom-com teen movies. You know, remember 13 Reasons Why? There was that
sure.
whole movie, and now we have Euphoria. I mean Riverdale, and then there Riverdale, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, like all these shows and everything. And then now we have Euphoria. And I'm like, they've just been leading up to things like Euphoria, and I can expect it to get even worse. I mean, remember Cuties when Cuties came out in 2020? Or yeah. Um they just keep sneaking these things in until we become used to it, and then they go one step further and then we're like, okay, that's way too much. But they hook you in
Sure.
because you're already hooked onto these other TV shows, and these TV shows are kind of programmed like that but just a little more scandalous. And so you're like, well, I really like these other shows they put out, so I'll keep watching this one. And then you watch the whole series and you're like, wow, there was a lot of bad stuff in there, but I really like the series anyways. And then they come out with something even more scandalous. And it just, the cycle keeps going.
It's incrementalism. It's the boiling of the frog. And I mean, I joke that Hollywood's motto is corrupting America since 1920. I mean, that's its job. We used to have the codes back in the 50s that restricted sex and language, but they got rid of that in the 60s, and now it's just total garbage. I will tell you though, I've seen the stats on Euphoria. It is the #1 show among teenagers and 20 something. So if you did an episode analyzing it, you just, from one YouTube content creator to the other, you're going to get tons of hits because that is the show of the zeitgeist for your
Is that on
generation.
Netflix?
No, it's on HBO Max. They have 2 seasons, but it's a horrendous show. It's truly from the devil. But by the way, I do want to do some rapid fire questions here at the end.
Okay.
Okay. Favorite
I'm ready.
saint?
My favorite saint is St. Francis of Assisi.
Okay. Why?
Sorry, that's my cat. Because I have tons of animals. We've always had animals my entire life, and when I was a kid, it was always very comforting to know that like there was a saint specifically for animals to watch over them. It gave me comfort knowing that the little baby bird that died in the backyard was being watched over by St. Francis. Obviously, we know that animals don't have eternal souls, but as a kid, I knew that, but it still gave me comfort that like Francis was comforting them.
There was a movie they made in the 1970s called Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. I had to watch it in my Catholic school, and it's just like a really bad hippie Godspell treatment of St. Francis. So do not watch that. I don't know if you could find it on YouTube.
review. I'm sure I could find it on Amazon Prime somewhere.
I'm sure you could, but I would definitely stay. We definitely need a new more modern treatment of St. Francis. How about favorite decade of the Rosary?
I really like, well, in
Favorite
general,
mystery?
the mystery.
Yeah, so like give me the decade of a certain mystery. Like I'll tell you, mine is the descent of the Holy Spirit from the glorious. I love that because that's all about the apostles being scared, and then the Holy Spirit comes and then they evangelize. And I like to do apologetics. So that I can relate to that one. What about you?
My favorite is the Agony in the Garden, which is the first decade of the Sorrowful Mysteries, because that really shows a part of Christ's humanity where he's like, you know, he's asking his Father, like, if this is your will, let it be done. But if it's not, let this cup pass from me. And I'm like, how many times have I told Jesus, I'm like, if this is your will, let it be done. But if it's not, take it away.
No, it is great. It's a great point. Like Mary's fiat's the same way, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see these examples in scripture of it's not my will, it's your will, and I will follow.
Exactly.
It. Favorite religious pilgrimage that you've been to or you want to go to?
I haven't really been on any because when I came back into my faith, COVID hit. And so I am just now going and traveling and doing these things. But I would love to go to the Holy Land one day. I know Patrick Madrid, or maybe it's Drew Mariani, are usually do a yearly pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And maybe that eventually one day. I would love to go. It's a little expensive, but, you know, maybe one day.
So you'd rather go to the Holy Land first before Rome?
It depends, because I would love to go to Rome, but it just depends on what opportunity would, I guess, come up first. And usually there's more opportunities to go to the Holy Land than Rome that I've recently seen. So I guess it just depends which would come first.
Okay. Last question is let's you're going to call your shot now. We know Francis eventually, of course, is going to die. I want you to call it. What is going to be the Pope's name, the next Pope? Give me the name. I'll go. I have two guesses. I mentioned this in the other live stream. I think the next Pope's either going to be JP the Third.
Okay.
It's going to be a guy who's going to be more moderate and wants to kind of heal the divide, or he might get a Francis II. Now, it could be your Cardinal Supich, who knows, he could be the next Pope. He'll probably pick Francis II, but what do you think? You think we'll get a Pius XIII?
It's interesting because Pius is really popular, but I would always love if there was a Pope that was like Leo, like that was like, you know, traditional. Although I could see a JP3 happening. I also feel like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the names have been repetitive, like Benedict. I love Pope Benedict, you know. So it's really tricky because I could go between Leo and Benedict, but I could also
not what you want though. What do you think it's going to be? Because I agree, I would love a Leo XIV. Leo XIII gave us the St. Michael prayer. I mean, he was a great traditional pope. But what do you think it's going to be? Call yourself.
I would say either Leo, or I would go with what yours is, the John Paul
JP III or Francis II?
No, JP III. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Because he was just such a huge movement. So, you know, John Paul II was such a big guy and he was huge, you know, so.
I think the name that is chosen will determine a lot of what the pontificate's going to be. So if somebody does pick a Pius XIII or Leo XIV, that's probably a good sign for traditionalists, and they'll probably unrevoke a lot of the restrictions. But I just think we're probably going to JP III or Francis II. But we'll see.
We'll find out.
Yeah, probably within a year or so. But
yeah.
Ambrose, I appreciate you coming on and spending a good hour and a half with me. It's great talk. And again, why don't you give everybody your credentials, how they can reach you?
Yeah, you can find me on basically any social media platform at thereligioushippie. Or, you know, you can use my website, I guess, thereligioushippie.com. And then just type in The Religious Hippie. I'm not on TikTok, but I have my own podcast, which is A Catholic's Perspective with The Religious Hippie. And I think that's it. I think that's all I got.
Cool. I'll put some of the links in the episode notes when this comes out.
Perfect.
Thank you for your time, Amber Rose. We appreciate
of course. It. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Guys, I appreciate you spending time. If you're watching this live or you're watching it later on, that was a great interview. Again, you can reach Amber Rose at The Religious Hippie and all those different sites. I will talk to you guys later. Take care. God bless.